Is this thing on? Excellent. That's crazy. Okay. Oh, wait, I need to stream the screen, duh. Screen. Hello. Welcome to Godot Talk. Huh? Yeah. Well, this is the whole talk of it. Yeah, Alex, let's go. All right. Yeah, I already did it. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. There should be free food, hopefully. That's a good question. They don't tell me. Yeah. They don't tell me when the food arrives, but yeah. This is the Godot Talk. Yeah. Okay. I don't want that smoke.
Be back in a minute. You got this, dude.
Yeah, thank you. They don't tell me when it arrives, which is annoying.
Yeah, like sometimes it arrives like a few minutes later. Like,
Yeah.
somebody's getting hurt. It's gonna hurt.
This is I was told there was going to be food, you know? It's yeah. You're going to shoot the messenger on this? Yeah, but I'm not in control. Yeah. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Crystal. You two are real ones. Yeah. Yeah, well, I do not control the rate at which food is delivered. Literally, I don't know. They should have let me do that, but they didn't. So yeah, right.
Still buffering.
True. There's just whatever automation. Yeah, let's go. Okay, I'm not lying to you guys. There is free food. Let's go. Hi, welcome to Good Talk. Yeah. Thank you, Crystal. Hire Crystal if you need telepathic powers. Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Oh, all good. Yeah, it's coming. It's literally right outside. It's coming in. No. Yeah. There is actual. It's outside. They're bringing a table. This is a professional organization. Hello, welcome to the Godot Talk. Hello. Pretty good. What about you? Yeah. This is the Godot Talk. Yes, it is. Yeah, well, take a seat. There's free food coming on in if you'd like, or if you're going to the town hall. I mean, yeah. Yep, it's recording right now. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's in the Game Jam. I'm gonna say it in the presentation, but it's in the Game Jam Club Discord or Teams, and then I'm gonna upload it somewhere. I'll figure it out. Thanks. Thank you.
get the reference.
Welcome to the Godot Talk. Yeah. It's a clever pun that some of you may, or clever title that some of you may guess. Yeah.
and they would switch roles like sometimes. They would do it that way.
That's awesome. Mhm.
I just read it in a somewhat annoyed voice.
Yep.
Godot from 8:30.
That one too, yeah. There's a lot of Godots for some reason. Yeah. Oh, we got fruit as well. Cool. Jesus, Harvey, calm down a second, would you? True. All right, well, okay, there's free food. If you want to go grab some, do it right now. I'll give you, if you'd like, have a couple minutes just to grab stuff. Better be quick. I know it's real popular. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I'm surprised. Yeah, like legitimately. This is super sick.
Everyone's coming here.
Yeah. Yeah. What? No, it's not. The indie studio talk was pretty unpopular. Grab like one slice so that people can have some, you know? Hello, welcome to the Godot Talk. Welcome to the Godot Talk. All of you, welcome to the Godot Talk. Yeah, it's yeah. There's seats over here, seats in the back, stuff like that. Hello, Ridley. Yes. Yep. Yes, it's unfortunate. I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know it was happening. Yeah. Yeah, there's seats in the back and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of yeah. This is way more than I was expecting. I'm gonna be honest. Thank you. Yeah, this is literally yeah, it is. It pretty much is. That's all. Yeah.
Using Godot.
Yeah.
Yeah, considering that, thank you. All the gifts of Godot and Baja Blast.
No problem. Hi, hello, welcome to the Godot Talk. Yeah, all right. Yeah, I am excited. Thank you. Yeah, nice to meet you in person, I guess. Jack the Hill. Huh? Sure. Absolutely. Jesus Christ. Hello, hello, welcome to the Godot Talk. There's open seats in the back and on the sides somewhere. Yeah. Oh, dang. Yeah. I thought it was just going to be the team. Yes, I think there's open seats like right there if you'd like to stay. Yeah. Yeah, hell yeah. Oh, all right. I will wait. I'll wait a couple more minutes for people to get settled in with their food. For the talk is about 55 minutes long. If you guys have played, if that's any reference to you guys. Yeah. But if that's a concern, then just know that the talk is about 55 minutes long, so we'll get started about a couple minutes. Well, hey, awesome. Glad you're here. Huh? Probably. Yeah, that's fine. Chris Comer or is going to do the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, it's all good. Oh. All right, 1 more minute, and then we're going to get started because we are rather short on time. We've only got an hour. All right, let's begin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Godot Talk. I hope you all are comfortable and seated and fed. To set your expectations a little bit, this is not a tutorial on how to use the Godot game engine, but rather an explanation as for why you should even use it in the first place. There's a lot of hesitation in the games industry surrounding Godot about whether or not it's even viable for game projects. And today I'd like to dispel a little bit of those concerns with my talk. So without further ado, this is Stop Waiting for Godot, an argument on why you should use the Godot game engine today. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is Ben Kurtin. I'm a junior BSc SGD here at DigiPen, pronouns they, them. I've been using Godot for about 4 years at this point. And if I haven't made it abundantly obvious yet, I love game development. It's been my dream since childhood to create games for other people, and now I'm here at DigiPen finally doing exactly that. Some of my most recent projects here at DigiPen include Shroom and Doom for Game 200 using a custom engine. And it's also on Steam, and also Goosetic for Game 300 using Unreal, still currently in development. Yeah, those are the only 2 games on this slide not made with Godot. I've made, other than that, my personal projects in my free time have been almost always using Godot. I've made a variety of games, including 2D games, 3D games, web games, VR games. I've even dabbled in mobile a little bit, so I generally have a good idea of how to use the engine. Now, given all this, and given my enthusiasm for creating video games, it might come as a surprise to you that I almost quit. Yeah, I almost did. And the reason for that is because I've been trying all my life to try and make video games, but I've always been frustrated with the tools that I've been using. One of those being Game Maker Studio, right? I tried this as a kid. I went to coding classes. I went to coding camps. I tried everything I could to use this engine, but it just did not jive with me. I didn't really like how the scripting blocks and the coding blocks or coding scripts kind of worked at the same time. And it's also really only good for 2D grid-based games. And I don't obviously want to make just 2D grid-based games. What about Unity, right? Well, in high school, I finally actually got to do some programming classes for real, and I got confident enough to actually try out, the most popular game engine in the world. And after a couple personal projects and a couple game jams, I came to the conclusion that Unity was also just not right for me. It just feels so slow and clunky to use. It's slow to create a project. It's slow to open a project. It's slow to edit code because it has to recompile every single time you make a change. And it's even slow to edit variables in an intuitive way because normally you would use a public variable that you can edit in the inspector, and once you edit it in game and close the game, then it just erases that data and goes back to a previous value. I just didn't like that. There was just a lot of friction when using Unity. What about Unreal? Well, Unreal was always daunting to me as a kid because it's a huge engine. It's got lots of features. But finally, here at DigiPen, I got to try it out extensively with my Game 300 team. And after about 6 months of continued use, I've come to the conclusion that I hate it even more than Unity. Okay, yeah, okay, I get it. I get it. That's a hot take. I'm probably in the minority for this, and I will concede that game designers and artists and audio designers have a really good time with Unreal because a lot of tools are provided for them. But in my opinion, for programmers, this engine is abysmal to work with. It crashes constantly. It's using blueprints sucks. I hate visual scripting. It's so much slower than just typing stuff out. And even the C++ side of Unreal is suboptimal in my opinion. The style guide is atrocious. The macros are ugly. And the interoperability between C++ and blueprints is middling, right? You can go from blueprints to C++ or C++ to blueprints, but not the other way around. And also, both systems can just corrupt randomly for some reason. Don't know why. It's happened to us twice. So what's the issue here? Okay, I can make games in these engines, right? But I just really don't like doing it because they frustrate me to no end. They're just tools that do not make sense to me. So what would make sense to me? Well, the first thing that would make sense to me is an engine that is easy to use and easy to start from scratch, right? If I want to start prototyping something right away, I just want to open the project, wait a couple seconds, and start scaffolding a prototype. But I also, if I'm continuing a project, I also don't want to wait forever just to open it and edit it and make changes and all that. I also need to be flexible to change. And what I mean by this is I would like to edit stuff while the game is running. At the very least, I would like to edit persistent values like base HP and max speed in an intuitive way. And at best, I would like to edit things like assets or even code, ideally, while the game is running. I also want my engine to be free of bloat. And what I mean by this is I want it to do exactly what it needs to do. Physics, graphics, audio, navigation systems, stuff like that should come with the engine, but in a small package, because these days game engines are really large, and I don't feel like they need to be. Finally, it also needs to be capable of making any project that I can think of, right? 2D, 3D, VR, AR, XR, MR, spatial computing, mobile networking, anything that you can think of, the engine should be able to do, even if it's not something you're doing right away. And after countless hours of searching and trying out game engines, I finally found Godot, and it was that solution for me. And today, it still is that solution for me. And I'm going to argue that it can be that solution for you, that you can actually use Godot today to start making games now. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about what Godot can do, the pros of it, the cons of it, also what you can do to make it right for your project, and ultimately answer the question, should you use Godot? So without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's talk about what Godot even is. There may be some people in here who are using game engines for the first time, which is understandable, right? Or even seasoned veterans will appreciate understanding what Godot can do in a general sense. So let's get right into it. Godot is a free and open source game engine. And what that means is that you can freely see the code, you can make contributions to it, and you can use it for whatever projects you'd like. Commercial, personal, academic, you can use it so long as you give them credit. Now, this is a major selling point for most people when they're advertising the engine, but it doesn't tell you what the engine can do, which is what I would like to clarify in a second. But to start off with, Godot started development in Argentina by two guys, Juan Litinetsky and Ariel Mansour. It then was publicly released in 2014. It's written entirely in C++, so you know that it's written in a performance language. And also, it used to only be a 3D engine, fun fact. In fact, this is kind of a misconception that lots of people have with Godot today, that it only can do 3D or 2D or something like that. So I would like to clarify that it can do all dimensions of play, starting off with 2D. Godot supports 2D physics, 2D graphics, 2D audio, spatial audio, and even, of course, 2D UI. An example here is Usagi-shima, which is a stylized mobile game, which is about building a town with little critters. It's very nice, looks very pretty, and Godot is a popular option for these kinds of stylized or pixel art games. Godot, in fact, can do 3D. It can do 3D physics, 3D graphics, 3D spatial audio, 3D navigation, all these kinds of things that you would expect in a larger game engine, Godot can do. An example of this is Sonic Colors Ultimate, which is, fun fact, the only AAA game in Godot so far. And it can also do virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality, mixed reality, spatial computing, whatever you want to call it, Godot can do that. An example of this is Friday Night Funkin' VR, a fan game for a game called Friday Night Funkin'. And disclaimer, I made that, and I think I'm the only person in the world to have made a full VR game. I don't know. I tried searching, really, I did. But that's an example of VR in Godot. There's also networking, support for networking. Now, obviously, it doesn't come with a server right out of the box, but it does come with functionality for you to create multiplayer games with the engine. An example, the largest example of this so far is called the Mirror, which is an open source alternative to editors like the Fortnite engine or the Fortnite editor and Roblox. It also comes with support for multiple programming languages. This includes its own custom scripting language called GDScript, C#, which is familiar to programmers and designers alike, and obviously C++, which is familiar to general programmers or people coming from Unreal. I'll talk more about these in a little bit because there's some interesting things that you can do with these languages. Another thing Godot does is it supports multiple graphics drivers. Its primary driver is Vulkan for higher-end devices like high-quality PCs or consoles like the PlayStation 5, but it also supports OpenGL for lower-end devices or web exports or lower-end consoles, or even older smartphones. It also does technically come with support for DirectX, but with a caveat that I will explain later. It also, you can use it to develop for all major platforms, right? You can use Godot on pretty much any machine that you can think of, which includes obviously Windows, Mac, and Linux. You can also, interestingly enough, develop on Android with the mobile editor and for the web with the web editor. Now, these versions of the editor are more limited because obviously they're on lower end devices, but at the very least, it's interesting to know that you can try out Godot without having to commit to installing it onto your computer. Finally, you can actually export to pretty much every major platform that you can think of using Godot. Obviously, this means desktop environments like Windows, Mac, and Linux, but you can also do things like mobile platforms like Android and iOS. You can also export games to the web using HTML5. And it's a common misconception that Godot games can't go onto consoles. This is wrong. You can, in fact, get your Godot games onto Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo Switch. Now, of course, there's a caveat there, which I will again explain later. So that's the gist of Godot, right? That's kind of the high-level features that you would want to know about the engine going into it. So now you're probably thinking, well, okay, this is kind of the same as other engines that I've been working with. How is Godot any better than them? And I argue that it is better in quite a few ways, starting off with the fact that it is extremely lightweight. And the best way I can show this is with an illustration. Up in the top left is Godot. It's about 100 megabytes in size, and that's it. You don't have to install it. You just get the executable and run it and start using it. In comparison, this is Unity. It's about 15 gigabytes, which means Godot is about 0.6% the size of Unity. This is Unreal. Unreal is at the very least 100 megabytes. And when you want to include things like debugging and template files and stuff like that, you could argue that it is 35 gigabytes if you only get the core components. But even so, and if you want to do much with it, you got to get the 100 gigabytes. Godot is 0.00003% the size of Unreal. And the fact that it's even comparable in feature set to either of these engines is extremely impressive. It's also a legitimate issue these days that games are becoming hundreds of gigabytes large. And for developers, those games are likely even larger on their machines. And to add another game engine, which is like 100 gigabytes like wide, like it's the size is massive, is, you know, it could be a serious issue, especially if you go out and buy storage space just to make games. Godot allows you to just boot it up wherever and whenever so that you can make games whenever you'd like. Another thing that's really nice about Godot is that it covers all the ways you'd want to code, right? For designers and programmers, there's obviously C# if you're coming from Unity, and C++ if you're coming from Unreal. But there is a third option, and that's GDScript. What's that about? Well, that's Godot's custom scripting language, as I mentioned before. And the things that I'm going to mention apply to any programming language that you can use with Godot. Starting off with the fact that it has a very powerful event system. What I mean by this is that with Unity, right, event systems are typically used for things like input actions or UI. In Unreal, it's a similar situation, and it's easy to create custom events in Unreal, but you can only do them in the event graph, which is kind of limiting. In Godot, you can use this event system anywhere. You can put it in any function you'd like. You can use anything you would like to create flexible game logic. What about first-class functions? For many people, you won't understand what this means, but for programmers, this means that you can use functions like objects. You can pass them as parameters, you can return them as a type, you can keep them in other objects. And this is actually what allows the event system to be so powerful, because you can use any function in Godot as part of the event system, which allows you to have a very modular system for making games. What about dynamic and static types, right? Godot, by default, comes with a dynamic type. You don't have to type your variables, so a variable can be like an int, or a float, or a string, or a function, or an object. It can be anything. But you also have the option, if you're worried about performance, to add types to all your parameters, to all your variables, to all your return types, which not only gives you the benefit of error checking, but also the ability, it actually does increase performance significantly. The fact that you can have both dynamic and static types in the same language is not to be underestimated. You can, for situations in which objects are flexible and need to change, you can do that in Godot. But most of the time, if you're worried about performance or you want to have the confidence that you're writing the correct code, you just put static types. Many scripting languages do not allow you to do this, and I think that's extremely valuable. Also, there's cross-language scripting, right? GD script can communicate with C# and C++, and any other language that you add on to Godot, GD script can communicate with it. It's even the same for the other languages as well. They can communicate very easily, which is very powerful if you prefer working in a different language but still want to leverage some of Godot's abilities. Another thing that's really great about Godot is the way that it organizes game objects. So let me explain. In Unity and Unreal, you have prefabs and actors. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're generally an object that contains other objects in a tree-like manner. Pretty intuitive. This is called a scene in Godot. So you can create multiple scenes inside of other scenes, like if you have an enemy type, you can instantiate it multiple times and save it into a file. Standard stuff. In Unity and Unreal, there's also the concept of a level, which is, an object type that contains other objects in a tree-like manner. Wait a second. These kind of look the same, right? Like visually they look the same, but structurally they also kind of look the same, right? I mean, maybe the level has like environment data. And how is that much different from a regular old game object? What's the difference? Aren't they the same thing? Godot argues that they are, which is why in Godot, levels are also just scenes, which is a really strange thing to think about. There's no native level type in Godot. You use it by you create levels by composing scenes together. And why is this so good? Why is this the way that Godot did it? For two reasons. First, when you're it makes it easy to compose large scenes and split them up into parts. For example, if you have a level that contains level geometry and enemies and props and stuff like that, and you want to put it into a larger open world or an open zone, you literally just drag and drop it into that larger world. With editors like Unity and Unreal, you have to do special things. You have to use special certain subsystems to create these large levels. In Godot, it's built in. This is the default. This is what you do to create larger scenes. It's also a little bit more organized in terms of the code, right? In Unity and Unreal, there are tons of functions for instantiating objects, game objects, and levels. There's tons of separate functions for each of them. And it's not necessarily that this is difficult in either of those engines, but in Godot, it's just 4 functions to load, add, and remove objects. Load, instantiate, add child, and queue free. That's it. That's all you have to remember if you want to start doing basic composition and making larger game objects or larger levels. Now, again, it's not necessarily that hard to do in Unity or Unreal, but I argue in Godot, it's a lot simpler. It makes a lot more sense. It's a lot easier to understand. But maybe that's not the selling point for you, but I think this will be. The fact that you can make changes in Godot on the fly. And what I mean by that is that you can make a lot of changes while the game is running. To start off with, runtime variables. Maybe you need to teleport the player to a certain location, or you need to adjust something scaled to see what happens. Or maybe you need to recolor something just to see it more clearly. Godot has support for that, much like Unity and Unreal. The other thing that it does is properties. So in Unity, these are your public variables. In Unreal, these are your blueprint values. Blueprint values, I don't think those can be edited at runtime, but with Unity, they can. But the problem is if I have a persistent value, say like base HP or max speed, those get reset in the inspector if you're not using a scriptable object. In Godot, you have the option to make these variables persistent, so that way you can edit them while the game is running. Even better than that, though, you can edit assets on the fly. This includes textures, models, animations, audio, any kind of data, really, that is inside of Godot in a file. You can edit it while the game is running. But it's even better than that. You can modify the very code of your game while the game is running. Now, the caveat is that's only GD script because C# and C++ are compiled languages. But the very fact that you can change how your game works, how your system works while it is running is super, super powerful. It's very key for programmers and system designers and people who are working with the logic of the game to be able to make edits very quickly and easily while the game is running. I argue that this is a feature that is better than in Unity or Unreal. It's just not something that you can replicate very easily. Okay. That's all well and good, right? But there's a catch, right? It sounds like rosy fields, right? But there is a catch, right? There is. Nothing is perfect, and Godot is certainly not. The last time I gave a presentation about Godot, I was given feedback that it felt like my presentation was an advertisement, which implied that I wasn't talking about the negatives of Godot or that I was dodging them because I didn't want to talk about them. Today, I would like to remedy that and tell you about what exactly is wrong with Godot when using it to make games today. Starting off with the fact that its open sourceness can actually be a hindrance sometimes. Now, in general, it is good to be open source because you can see exactly what the project is doing. You can look at the code. You can make edits to it. You can help make it better for not just yourself, but everybody else. And in an ideal world, there's no drawback to this. But this is reality. And in reality, we only have so much time, money, and resources to create video games. And so Godot's open sourceness leads to a couple of issues. Starting off with the fact that there's no single entity that you can point to when Godot has issues. It's not like with a company that has customer support where you can point at the engine and say, hey, what's going on here? What's wrong? Can you fix this right away? Godot doesn't have that kind of entity. Now, in fairness, there are companies like W4 Games, which is a company created by the Godot founders to address commercial concerns, as well as Vertex Ludi, which is created by a Godot contributor also for the same purpose of making Godot viable for commercial projects. But the fact is, at this point in time, there is no way to just go to a contributor and ask them to fix something for you because they are simply volunteers, right? You may have contributors who stay on the project for years at a time, or you may have people who hop in, fix a bug, leave, and then never return, which is totally understandable because that's the nature of open source. But it does conflict when making high-end projects that need to be ready for production. Another thing that Godot does weirdly is the fact that proprietary features are tough, right? It's the nature of open source. You cannot put proprietary code or logic or assets or anything like that into Godot because that would conflict with NDAs or copyright or something like that. For instance, DirectX. In Godot 4.3, DirectX support will be included, but you have to do it in a weird way because Godot cannot put DirectX directly into the engine. Same thing with console supports. You can't directly export games to consoles because those SDKs are under NDA, right? They can't be included in the engine, so you have to go about it in a roundabout way. Same thing with Fmod or Wise. There's no official support for those plugins. There's no plugins by those companies that are officially supported, and they obviously don't come with the engine. What about FBXs, which is a huge thing for artists? You can use FBXs inside of Godot, but you have to do it in a roundabout way currently that just is frustrating to do. What about a paid asset store? Which is, not something necessarily wrong with the engine itself, but the economy around it. And the reality is a lot of people make their money by making plugins for other developers. It's a very popular thing in Unity and Unreal. It's a thriving marketplace in both cases. But the fact is, because Godot was not making money for a very long time, they've never had the chance to make an asset store for Godot. Now, apparently, it is in the works, but again, it's not something that you can rely on today. Another issue with Godot is the fact that it's, is a relatively recent project. Was made within the last 10-ish years, so it's clearly got some improvements to make. There are significant features which are still changing and growing over time. One of the big ones is physics. The physics in Godot 4.0 were largely reworked, and at best, they are okay, which is actually unacceptable for a lot of people because lots of interesting games are made using physics. So if the physics system is glitchy or bad, you can't make the game in that engine, right? This is a deal breaker for a lot of people, and understandably so. What about rendering, right? Well, the renderer is complete for the most part, except for they don't have motion blur, which again, could be a huge issue for people who want to make games that include motion blur. But the other issue is that certain features in lower-end devices are just not available when they should be. In particular, the OpenGL layer of Godot is not feature complete. There are things that it should have from Vulkan that it does not. Another weird thing about the rendering system is how often it's getting changed. For example, in Godot 4.3, this is the new global illumination solution that Godot will be implementing. And to be fair, it looks really good. Like right out of the box, it's easy to use. But this is the second time they've done this, right? It makes people concerned that the rendering system of Godot changes so often. It makes it feel as if the engine is unstable and unready and not ready for production. Another thing is web exports, right? In the Godot community, it's really popular to create web games in Godot. But the fact is, Godot 4.0 is still working on making that better. Godot 3, it works great, but not in 4.0, especially with C#, because .NET is incompatible with HTML5. That's just how it is. What about the C++ extensions I mentioned earlier? Sure, you can make plugins via C++ in Godot. That's not that hard, but it's also not feature complete. For example, if you're trying to integrate a scripting language into Godot, something like Rust or Python or Lua or something like that, you cannot add a debugger to your scripting language, which again, could be a huge deal breaker for people. And there are certain issues like that in other parts of the C++ extensions. What about knowledge about how to use the engine, right? It's limited because there's not a lot of tutorials on it like there are for Unity and Unreal. It's kind of like a catch-22. In order to make tutorials for Godot, you have to use Godot. But in order to know how to use Godot, you have to use tutorials. It's an Ouroboros that needs to be, severed at some point, but not right now. And also, the design philosophy of Godot is, well, strict, because the Godot devs are very peculiar about what they want to integrate into the engine in order to make the features that they want more flexible and modular, which is great, but they also end up being unintuitive. For instance, the visual shader graph has features that maybe are renamed from what artists expect, or maybe it's just missing features that artists would need to create interesting visual effects. What about the particle system at Godot? In 4.0, it got reworked entirely, so now it works very well, but it's a huge, daunting beast, and there's not really any great tutorials on how to use it, especially if you're making physical particles that can collide with other objects or terrain. It is possible in Godot, but not many people know how to do it. What about being able to edit those runtime variables, like I mentioned earlier? Well, and I talked with somebody who thought it was straight up impossible to do that because he didn't realize what you had to do in the very obvious fashion is minimize your game, go to this button up here that says remote, which doesn't explain what it does. You click it, and then you can see all your nodes that are currently running and all of their current values, right? It's understandable why he would have missed that because it's not obvious that that's what you would do in order to edit your game in real time. What about the tile set system? In Godot 4.0, again, it's a huge system that got reworked, and now it's a lot better, but there's not many tutorials on it outside of the documentation because people haven't had the time to experiment with it. What about the 3D importer or the 3D animation tools, like the animation retargeter? Like, that's a thing in Godot. Do you know how to use it? Probably not. There's not really any tutorials on it. So the knowledge about how to use Godot is limited because of its infancy and because people are hesitant to use it to make real games and understand how to do certain things in it. Finally, it is also genuinely missing some features that you would expect in high production games like AAA, like for AAA studios or for even AA studios. One of the biggest things is level streaming, right? Now, Godot has audio streaming because in general, you stream audio to a game engine. That's how it works. But you cannot do things like texture streaming or animation streaming or mesh streaming, which are all the things that would make level streaming possible. Godot just can't do that right now. What about the fact that it takes a long time to add large scenes into the game? It doesn't take a long time to load them because you can very easily multi-thread the process of actually loading the file with your level in it, but to add it to the scene tree takes a long time because the process is mostly single-threaded. They're looking to improve this, but again, it's something you just can't do right now. What if you want to make hundreds of AIs? What if you're making a bunch of NPCs in a city that want to be controlled by a single controller? Or what if you want to make swarms of enemies that fly above you? In Godot, there's no built-in system to create swarms of AI. It's just not possible unless you do it yourself. What about version control, right? Now, in lots of game engines, there's always issues with version control. It is inevitable, but the fact is Godot only comes with support for one type of version control, Mercurial, which you probably don't know about because we only use like SVN and Git here, right? But even then, you have to use external plugins to integrate stuff like GitHub or Git or anything like that. So Godot needs to improve its support for other types of version control. What about visual scripting, which is a huge thing for designers or artists or essentially any non-programmer who's trying to prototype a game without asking somebody for help or doesn't have somebody who can help? Well, in Godot 4.0, they discontinued their visual scripting system because it sucked, because it was made for programmers by programmers who don't do visual scripting, right? It wasn't made with a designer in mind, which was frustrating for them to use. So they just ditched it because it wasn't worth developing on. So maybe they'll revisit it in the future, but again, Not right now. And even so, that's even a broader problem with Godot itself, that the whole engine is essentially not intuitive to non-programmers. In a sense, it's more like Unity, which is very programmer-centric, and it makes sense to them. But for anybody else, you have to configure it in certain ways in order to make it make sense for you. So what is this all an issue of? It's time, right? Over time, Godot will get better at this stuff. They will fix all those features, or at the very least, most of them, so that way it's a better option for more people. But this is reality. People want to make games today. They don't want to have to wait 1 or 2 or even 4 years down the line just for something that just to make it viable to create the product that they want. That's just not a thing. So, given all this, now you're probably worried, right? Like, okay, this is a huge bummer. Is Godot even viable for the kinds of projects that I want to make? That's where this third act comes in, right? Normally, in a presentation like this, you would talk about the far future of this product, like, oh, in 5 years, Godot will be able to do this and that, and it will be great. But this is not what you're here for. You're here to understand why you can use Godot today, why you can use Godot right now for the kinds of projects that you have in mind, and I'm here to tell you that it is possible. Starting off with physics, right? The deal breaker for lots of people, because physics can make a game interesting. But if you have bad physics, then you can't really have a game. In Godot, there are plugins that you can use to basically just rip out the underlying physics system and replace it with your own. Two very popular options are Box2D, which is tried and true for tons of games, like Geometry Dash or, yeah, anything like that, or other game engines that use Box2D right away. There's also Rapier, which is a recent physics engine made in Rust. It's for both 2D and 3D physics. It also has a plugin for its 2D version in Godot. There's even a couple options for any physics programmers out there to make it faster or more correct. But what about 3D physics, which is arguably even more important to do because lots of games these days are being made in 3D? There's an even better option for you, and it's called Jolt. Jolt is an open source 3D physics engine specifically made for video games. And why is that so great for it to have a plugin for Godot? Well, it's because it's been used in AAA titles like Horizon Forbidden West, right? So you know that it's a physics engine that's tried and true, that's battle tested, that's ready for any kind of project. Now, the interesting thing is that the Godot devs are very, 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 very interested in making this physics engine actually part of Godot. So I can't tell you why, but I have a very good hunch that in the next couple of months, Godot will talk about its relationship with Jolt. Don't know why, I just have a very, very good hunch. What about designers, right? Designers, you might want to listen up because these next couple slides are for you, right? What if you want to create levels in Godot? Obviously, that makes sense to create levels in Engine because you want to be able to make something and then test it right away and then see the issues with it. In Godot, you have constructive solid geometry like you do in Unity or Unreal, where you can just place stuff like blocks, where you can place a block, drag its side, and just extend it by that side only. Or you can have like cylinders or spheres or 3D rings, all that stuff that you would typically set for basic prototyping things, Godot supports. But what if you want to do something more complicated, like say terrain? There's a couple options for that. For example, there's Terrain 3D, which is it's up and coming, but it is a very developed terrain editor for Godot. I used it for one of my design projects, and it felt really good. And even got better very recently by being able to be more optimized and also be able to create slopes easier, right? Another option is TerraBrush, which also includes features for adding foliage or trees or rivers or anything like that. That's another terrain editor which has been tested and seems to work very well. But what if you want to make indoor environments, right? Like large buildings. What if you want to make what if you want to make like hard slopes or stairs or anything like that? Well, there are plugins to integrate stuff like the valves level files called Godot VMF. That's the file. VMF is the format for valve level files, and so you can use an editor like Hammer++ to create levels in Godot. There's also Quido, which is an importer for Quake levels in Godot. So you can use Quake editors to create levels for your Godot game. What about AI? And not the generative AI that people have been talking about. I mean the actual robust, widely developed game AIs. There's a couple options for that, starting off with Phantom Camera. Phantom Camera is a very regularly developed plugin, which makes it so that you can create, complex third-person cameras or cinematic scenes or anything like that. It's a very popular option among the Godot community, and it also is very similar to Cinemachine in Unity. Another option is, if you want to do things like behavior trees, is Behave, which is very similar to Unreal's like layout for behavior trees. It even shows you how the behavior tree is running. But if you want something even more powerful than that, I might recommend Limbo AI, which not only includes an editor for behavior trees, but also a debugger too. So these are all great options if you want to start creating complex AIs in Godot. What about visual scripting, right? As I said earlier, visual scripting is not an official thing in Godot. It no longer is supported by the Godot devs. But if you need a solution, it turns out somebody has already made it. It's called Orchestrator, and I could go on and ramble on how well it is, but it's literally just blueprints. Unreal blueprints in Godot. That's the selling point. That's it. But it does work. I've tried it out, and it actually works nearly exactly how you would expect it to, like it does in Unreal. So this is an option for you designers if you're wanting to look into visual scripting for your games. Well, now, what about artists, right? Or no, sorry, what about audio designers? Audio designers, for you, is very simple. You need Fmod and Wise. And if you don't have those, then you don't really have a game to work on. Well, fortunately, a guy has made 2 plugins specifically for both Fmod and Wise, and has actually used them in game projects. For Fmod, here's a real example that actually does show the Fmod Studio layout. In Wise, I opened it up, and it does seem to support all the features an audio person would need when implementing audio. But I also might want to recommend you to look out for Godot 4.3, because it adds new features such as the interactive audio stream, the playlist audio stream, and the synchronized audio stream. And these are features that are going to be built into Godot, which are basically very similar to Wise or Elias. So audio designers, you can obviously use these plugins, but I would also look out for the next version of Godot that's coming out very soon. Now, what about artists, for real this time? I've kind of been neglecting you this whole talk, and I understand. I haven't had much to talk about, and it seems like the graphics of Godot are kind of bad, but I would like to clarify they're not. So for 3D, you can do things like importing, dot objects, GLTFs, GLBs, but you can also use FBXs. It's just a little bit painful right now. But in the next version, Godot 4.3, it will come in with a built-in importer for FBXs, which is not only easier to use, but also a lot better than the old version. What about if you're using Blender, right? Well, as it turns out, Godot actually supports you just putting your blend files into Godot and using them directly. So you can actually create your 3D models in Blender and directly inside of your Godot project. What about animations? Well, Godot does have an animation system. You can animate 2D skeletons and 3D skeletons, but you can also actually animate anything in the game. In Unreal, you can animate audio callbacks. In Godot, you can do the same thing. You can even animate code functions. You can call functions inside of your animations. There's also, animation state machines like you would expect from Unity or Unreal. Those are also in Godot. And finally, if you are worried about visual effects, I haven't talked about it much this talk other than it looks confusing, but I promise you that you can create some really good results with the particle system of Godot. Now, if that's not enough for you, if you need better support with the tools that you're using, I might recommend a couple things. First of all, the Blender pipeline, for people who want to not just make models in Godot, but also scenes in Godot with physics and stuff like that. There's a Blender pipeline which allows you to do that, to just put your blend files into Godot and edit scenes inside of Blender. If you're using programs such as Krita or Sprite, there are plugins which make it so you can put their native file formats into Godot and use them directly. In particular, Sprite is a very popular option among indie devs because it's a very, very good pixel art editor and animator. And the fact that you can just put your files into Godot with this plugin is excellent for them. What if you want to do prop passes? What if you want to place objects in a large spread across large terrains or large levels? There's an option for you. It's called Spatial Gardener, which allows you to put things like trees and foliage and rocks or anything that you can define as being an object that you spread across land or ground. Godot can help with that with this plugin. What if you want to make even more complex visual shaders in a different program? Complex visual effects in a different program. There is an open source particles editor called Effectseer, which is used by other actual game companies like SNK, particularly for the King of Fighters. So if you want to use this program to create fancy visual effects, they have an official plugin that they developed for Godot so that you can make some really nice looking visual effects. What about ads, right? Okay, let's be honest here. The mobile games market is huge. It's a large part of the game industry, and there's just no denying that. So if you want to make a mobile game with ads in it, you can. I talked with somebody who thought it wasn't even possible to make mobile games with Godot, let alone mobile games with ads. But I'm here to tell you that it is. The primary plugin that you'd want to use is AdMob integration, which allows you to put, banner ads or interstitial ads or full screen ads or video ads, anything like that. Godot can support via AdMob. But there's also, if you want to do things like in-app purchases, official plugins from the Godot devs themselves for iOS in-app purchases and Android in-app purchases. What about other ad companies, though? Are other ad companies really considering Godot as an option to create mobile games? Of course they are. They want to make money. So there are a couple companies, for example, AppLovin, who have a plugin for their service, AppLovin Max, directly inside of Godot that they maintain themselves. There's also another company called Yodo1, which I don't know that much about. I found them through some preliminary research, but they do have a software which actually helps you integrate ads into your games, and one of their options is Godot. So it's nice to know that if you are looking to make mobile games with ads in them, if that's something that you are interested in doing, that you can do that with Godot, and it's supported by actual companies. What about networking? Lots of people want to make networked multiplayer games these days because that's the best way to play games with friends. Godot can do that. Now, obviously not out of the box, but it does have functions which make it so that you can create multiplayer games and connect to servers and manage them through Godot. But if you want a solution that you don't want to build yourself, there are a couple options. The first is one of the sponsors of Godot, called Heroic Labs, have a service called Nakama, which is specifically for social multiplayer games. This is, things that have chat boxes and large open worlds like MMOs, stuff like that. They have an official plugin for Godot, which allows you to integrate their service into Godot. What about another example called GD Sync, which is a service specifically for Godot to create Godot multiplayer games that are arena-like, lobby-like, that are less social and more bashing heads together. This is a service for that. Now, just as a disclaimer, this is in beta, so if you're looking for something stable, I probably wouldn't recommend this, but at the very least, you do get the option to try it out, to prototype a multiplayer game with up to 2 gigabytes of data per day, and then you can very easily upgrade to what I think are relatively cheap options. Finally, what if you need something official, though, something that you know will work with your Godot game? Well, as I mentioned before, W4 Games is a company created by the Godot founders specifically for commercial products and services for large companies using Godot. And one of their services that's coming out this year is called W4 Cloud, which is basically a service for making multiplayer games in Godot of any size. It can be small arena-like games, or it can be large MMOs. Godot will be able to officially support that via this service by the official devs. Finally, what about console support, which is another deal breaker for tons of people? I'm here to tell you that it is totally possible to publish your Godot game onto consoles, and there's 2 ways that you can do that. The first being is by going through a porter or a publisher, and there's tons and tons of options. Godot themselves even has a list of publishers that they regularly update showing their support for porting Godot games to Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo Switch and anything like that. But what if you need an official solution, one that you know is backed by the developers themselves? Well, again, W4 Games, it comes in to save the day because they are launching a service called W4 Consoles later this year. It will start supporting Xbox and PlayStation, and then later on, Xbox and Nintendo Switch, and later on, it will support PlayStation 5. But this will be the service officially supported by the developers to create games for consoles. If you're really looking forward to integrating the SDK yourself, or you want to tweak it yourself to suit your needs. So that's a lot of information, right? Now you know pretty much everything there is to know about Godot at a high level. But the question still remains, should you even use it in the first place? And that's a complicated question, but before we do that, let me recap what we've learned, right? Godot, I argue, is a very capable 2D and 3D game engine, and it's open source, and it's free to use, all that good stuff. But the advantages of it are that it's easy to use and easy to start from scratch. right? You can start projects with Godot very easily, and all of the good things about Godot that make it very flexible for changing stuff and creating assets and using these plugins make it so that it's very easy to edit existing projects as well. It's also flexible to change because you can edit literally anything at runtime. You can edit data, assets, even code. It's also free of bloat. It's only 100 megabytes. It does exactly what it needs to do. It has physics, it has audio, it has graphics, it has navigation systems, it has all that good stuff that you would expect from a game engine in a very small package. Finally, it is also capable of making any game that you want. It can do 2D, 3D, VR, AR, MR, XR, mobile networking, you name it, Godot can do it. But of course, that's not without its drawbacks, right? Its compatibility with proprietary software is limited because it simply cannot include proprietary stuff into the engine's code. There's also the fact that significant features are still evolving, right? Because it's still an engine that is kind of in its infancy, maybe into its teenage phase now. That's a weird analogy, but the point is it's still changing a lot, right? There's also the fact that it has a limited knowledge base because there's not a lot of tutorials on the engine. And there's also not a lot of people who have the time to experiment and figure out how to make certain things in Godot. There's also the fact that it is straight up missing some high production features that would make it viable for AAA games. Now, you can mitigate a lot of these issues with plugins, as I mentioned earlier. And by the way, I will give this presentation to literally anybody who asks. I will send it to you on Teams so you can look and explore the links and all that to see if those would work for you. But in general, a lot of these plugins and a lot of these external resources can help you mitigate those issues with Godot. So given all that, what the question is now, should you use Godot? Well, that's up to you. I can't really tell you whether or not to use Godot, right? Because you all have different needs. You all have different games that you want to make. You all have different aspirations, right? I can't tell you whether or not Godot is right for you, but I do hope that it's now an option for you and that you are willing to try it out in the near future or at any point in the future. I just highly recommend you try it out. But don't take my word for it. There's a ton of significant companies now who are either using or supporting Godot. For instance, one of the big ones is Sega. They literally trusted one of their largest IPs, Sonic the Hedgehog, with Godot via one of its smaller studios. What about Dave Szymanski, the guy who created Iron Lung or Dusk? His next game is using Godot. What about people who support monetarily, right? Like Relogic, the creators of Terraria. In November, they did a $100,000 donation and have been donating $1,000 per month since. They are one of the biggest patrons of Godot. Same with Robot Gentleman, right? The creators of 60 Seconds. They heavily support Godot financially. What about Megacrit? And as I learned today, they are making Slay the Spire 2 in Godot. But also they support Godot financially. So they are very heavy supporters of Godot. Finally, even companies like Google and Meta, two of the biggest companies in the world, want you to use Godot. With Google via Google Play, they're not only supporting Godot monetarily, but they're also helping make the mobile version of Vulkan a lot better, a lot more optimized, stuff like that. And Meta is not only helping them integrate the Quest SDKs for Godot, or at least making them compatible, but they're also making the general OpenVR implementation in Godot a lot better, not just for themselves, but for everybody. So this is my word. I tell you should use Godot, and these companies also say that you should use Godot. And a significant number of people are starting to rise up and say that you should use Godot. But the question is why? Why this engine? Why do I insist so strongly that you should try out this little engine that you've been talking about for an hour? It comes back to what I said in the beginning. I almost quit game development because I was frustrated with the tools that I was using to make games. It just wasn't fun. But then I finally found Godot, and it just opened the door for me in a lot of ways. In a sense, and it just made sense to me. It just made sense to create games with it. And in a sense, it actually saved my career because it got me to love game development. It got me to apply to DigiPen. It's why I'm here right now, talking to all of you. That's why I want you to try it, because maybe you'll go home today, tomorrow, later down the line. You'll download Godot. You'll try it out with a small project or something scrappy, and you'll come to appreciate the way I do. Or at the very least, maybe you'll understand why it has the potential to be an open source powerhouse that makes game development accessible for anybody. Maybe, just maybe. It's the engine you've been waiting for. Thank you very much. Woo! All right. Yes, I will. But thank you for coming to the talk. There's free food. No, there's not. Well, whatever's left, you can have. If you have classes to go, places to be, go right ahead. But there is questions now if you want to answer them. Shout out to Kieran over there for helping me make the poster. To Hebovich, if she's even here, it's for just arranging this in the first place. It was very ad hoc. And to my game team, who encouraged me to do this talk and helped me prepare it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll put it. I'm gonna post it in the Game Jam Teams, but also I'll just send it to you if you message me on Teams. You know, it's just Ben Kurtin. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great work, yeah. I got some questions for you.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. Let me.
right now, I'll wait for you to do this.
No, I'm just like, that's it. Woo!
So,
Thank you.
can you say anything about the comparative performance of the different languages that you can use?
GD script is the slowest, obviously, because it's scripted. But it's not terribly slow. It's not like unusable. It's definitely very good for game logic. C# is like the middle ground in terms of performance because it's, you know, a compiled language, and it also comes with nice features like garbage collection and all that. C# is obviously the fastest. C++, right? Because you can manage your own memory and you can also create highly efficient plugins.
With extending or replacing engine features as needed, or perhaps even more relevantly, editor tools that you can like extend the editors.
I have dabbled in it. It's not. It's a bit of a learning process. It's kind of a steep learning curve, obviously, because you have to, you know, edit. You have to figure out how to edit the editor so that you can add things like buttons or custom menus or anything like that. But it's not terribly. In my opinion, it's not terribly difficult to do. They've even improved it a lot since the initial release of 4.0, because it used to be pretty like rough, but now it's like very easy. You can reload your C++ scripts when you recompile them, like on the fly. And lots of people have made custom editors with Godot very easily. One person that's done so is Passive Star on Twitter, and he's very much customized the engine to fit his needs to make it easier for him to work on games.
Yeah, and because I was thinking, you talk about like some of the shortcomings it has have to do with, oh, this thing's underdeveloped and the you know, the physics isn't quite there yet, whatever. Some studios would be like, all right, no problem, we'll make our own physics anyway.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So I want to know, like, I mean, that's a pretty big undertaking to make your own physics system. But I mean, if someone wants to do something like that, a major engine component, I mean, the whole thing's open source anyway, right? So in theory, you can do that. I just want to know if you have any personal, like, either personal experience having done anything like that, or you know that that is a thing that's been done by this person and they have this anecdote that they could tell me.
Sure. Well, me personally, I haven't had the chance to do that because most of my games obviously don't require enough logic to really make an optimized plugin.
Yeah.
But there's quite a few people that you might want to look into, like the guys who are integrating Jolt into Godot.
Right.
They've done it very well.
Yeah.
The guy, I think his name is Jorrit Rowe, who develops Jolt and is also very interested in putting Jolt into Godot. He probably has a lot to say on integrating Jolt into Godot, whether it's officially or not officially. There's also the people, as I said in my presentation, who made things like Terrain 3D or TerraBrush. Any of those large editors that require like new tools to create, you know, terrain and stuff like that. Those would be good people to talk to if you're interested in reaching out to them and asking like, hey, how is it, you know, editing C++? How is it editing the C++ files and putting them into Godot? Also, oh yeah, Orchestrator too, because that's an undertaking. They rewrote the entire thing in C++, so that way it was much better. Because it used to be kind of like kludgy before, but now using C++, they can actually replicate the workflow of Unreal people. Sure.
Gotta go. Thanks a lot, Ben.
Yeah, no problem, Doug.
So, one of the things Ben and I talked about Godot is the fact that Godot runs on itself.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's a yeah. Yeah, you can. You just have access to that.
There's this game called Window Kill.
Yeah,
That was made in Godot.
it is.
The fact it can have multiple windows like that is so cool. Like the concept's really cool. It also supports transparent windows.
Yeah, it does.
That like if you want an application to either like kind of semi-obscure the screen but not completely, you could do that. Or you can create these kind of like idle games that exist at like the bottom of your window. And you can kind of be like playing a game or like farming or whatever while you're doing other stuff at the top of the screen, because that's just totally doable.
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, those are some nice things. Yeah, right.
Just use Godot to make software.
True.
There's a project called Material Editor that's really cool. It's basically like the Adobe Substance right now.
Yeah.
And that's made in Godot.
Yeah, that's true.
Like making web games and stuff with it, and that it had support for that. But then you also said something about a weird HTML.NET open source situation. Is it funky, or is it like Unity where it's just built in and you online web game stuff?
Yeah,
There's
so
something funky with it.
there is something funky with it.
Oh,
But for
no.
but if you want to do web games, I'd recommend you use Godot 3 instead, because while it is missing some of the nice features that Godot 4 has, it is completely viable for HTML games. But the only reason why it's funky for Godot 4 is because for some reason you can't use .NET in like net games. Like if you use like the C++ or the C# version of Godot, you can't export to web because they can't run the C#.
But what if you
On the
don't
web.
get the C#?
But if you're
When
doing
you
a
when you
different thing
download
that's not
Godot,
C#
there's one
Yeah.
with .NET included in one.
Yeah. Right now there's separate versions, ones that include C# and one that doesn't. But in the future they're trying to merge them, so it's just one
But if you don't
download.
have the C# .NET,
Yeah, super easily, very easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done it before. I could actually show you. Yeah.
Generation is possible in Godot, because one of the recent projects I saw, for whatever reason, someone ported exactly the Super Mario 64 character controller, so you can just have Mario running around like he does in Super Mario 64. Someone made a infinite thing where it's just a bunch of platforms and you could just collect stars infinitely using the Mario 64 physics.
I want to ask about lighting.
Sure.
Because what really frustrates me about Unreal is like if I want to make like stylized lighting, like a cell shader, I need to like put a post-processing unit over all this fancy lighting, like we call it like there's reflections and like goddamn like a bunch of
illumination.
yeah, like a bunch of like really complicated lighting stuff that I don't need. So like, and I saw like Godot can do that, but then I also saw like really simple lighting that looks like it was literally just like rays being calculated and then shadows being cast.
Yeah.
Is Godot able to just kind of have really basic lighting,
Yeah.
just rays and shadows without having to like put stuff on top of fancy lighting? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's the default in Godot. If you
That's
want to turn on a global illumination or screen space reflections or anything like that, that's an option that you enable rather than being mandatory like in
yeah, that's
Unreal.
great. I mean, even things look like seems really great.
Yeah, I mean, one of the games I made actually does this, was just baked lighting. That VR game that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that's all just baked lighting and like and stylized models.
Yeah. I gotta go. Thank you. This is a great presentation.
Thank you.
Dynamic typing.
Yeah.
C++.
Yeah, you can do that. It's just a variant type, right? They expose the underlying type that is dynamic, and you use that.
So they basically have like a base class that or something.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Parenting stuff.
That's the normal thing on Fluffy, right?
No, you have to make it yourself. Most people do not do dynamic types in C++ because that is difficult. But yeah, it might just because it's easy, right? Or like it's a nice feature. Yeah.
Arrays are a bit strange because you could totally do arrays of arrays, but it doesn't really recognize it.
Yeah, it doesn't do that. You can't subtype the arrays because I think for some reason it seems too difficult or something like that. Not sure.
then you can add arrays to that array.
Yeah.
Yes, but.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you had a question, Riley?
So is that like Unity where if you do that, sometimes it will just mess everything up, or is it pretty
Well,
clean?
I mean, it's clean for the most part. And obviously, if you do certain things, because what it has to do is it has to reload the entire script, starting from the start function and then going into the update function and all that. So if you do funky things, it will mess up. But in general, if you organize it carefully enough, you can make changes without breaking anything. But in general, for the most part, like if you're just writing code as you normally do, generally it's pretty clean when reloading scripts. Yeah. Recommendations? Sure. Yeah, there's actually, yeah, there is a growing number of channels now that actually do tutorials for Godot, but one of the biggest ones that I recommend to people is GD Quest, because he has been using Godot for like a long time, ever since like maybe 2.0 or something like that. So he has tons of tutorials on how to make certain kinds of games in Godot. And while a lot of his like older tutorials are in Godot 3, a lot of it can translate to Godot 4, and he's even making newer tutorials for the latest version of the engine. As far as other people, there was another one.
There's that one website you mentioned. Is that GD Quest or what?
Yeah, there's also GD Quest. Oh, I did not mention that. All the documentation's in editor, so you can actually pull it up inside the engine. And for the most part, yeah. If for other people, there is a guy named Godot Nears, I think.
I just found that. That's pretty good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. I think unfortunately, I think he AI generates his thumbnails,
I think that's true.
but he doesn't do that for his actual projects. Like the actual like tutorial does not use AI generated stuff. But for some reason, I don't know why it is what it is. But the tutorials are really good, like really, really good. Yes. Yeah. Well, if you're using with C#, well, it does have its own editor. It works very well with the GD script. And pretty much nothing else because it's very optimized for GD script. But there is actually an official plugin for Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code, yeah, but it works really well. You can also use Visual Studio for the C# version of Godot.
That's okay, great.
Yeah.
And also, if you are using GD script, the editor in engine does have like breakpoints.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, I'm sure, yeah,
Yeah, it's like a full-fledged Visual Studio level editor.
right.
Yeah.
Like you can,
Trying to like,
can you edit memory directly?
No, I don't think. Can you do that in other engines? I don't think.
You can do that.
Huh?
Yes.
Yesn't. Well, you heard it from Vim. Yesn't. But not really in the Godot version of the editor. It's more so you just see the values. You can't. I mean, you can edit the values in a little pane at the bottom of the screen. You can actually tweak them for certain variables if they're not constant. But that's the extent of it. Yeah. What's up? Oh, hey man, how's it going? Yeah, some of them at least. I think all of my indie projects. I mean, I'm not selling them, so yeah, I can put them up on GitHub and stuff. Sure, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. For Friday. I did a second thing for Friday Night Funkin'. I didn't mention, but I recreated.
yeah, I
I
saw that.
re-
I was like, oh, that's
No. So I recreated the Friday Night Funkin' like from scratch, and then
wow.
I made it better.
Oh.
I don't want to toot my own horn, but I tried to improve the usability of like making content in it. I also made mods. Like I made a modding system, which was cool. Yeah. So it's yeah.
Thank you for the time.
No problem.
I gotta head off, man, but it was really great getting to see this presentation. You did great.
Thank you.
Send me the slides for
Stop
later.
waiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, stop waiting. Thank you. Yeah, just anybody who wants it, just send me a message on Teams. I will send the presentation to you. So they're doing a new system where they release new versions of Godot quarterly. So it should be sometime out, I think around April or May or something like that. Yeah. But they're having a more consistent release schedule now for not just new features, but new fixes as well. Yeah, but I didn't mention that because, I mean, it's open source, sure, but I want to make sure that people who don't need to compile the engine in order to use Godot, right? All right. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. There is a shortcut in Godot to make it more like Unreal where you move around with the mouse and the WASD. I forget what it was called. I think it was Control L or something like that. Kind of. You have to use a separate node and then edit it so that its rotation is around a different point. For controls like UI stuff, that's much more easy. It's a much easier. Oh, and also for snap. Oh, I get you. Grid placements. Yes, you can do that in Godot. Grid placement or freeform placement. Yeah, for certain things.
There's, in the edit, I've used a kind of grid-based thing for one of my projects in Godot, and you can like snap the grid for some things, and it also uses anchor points for a lot of things. You're able to move things around based on that. The control node itself.
Offset, I think.
Yeah, it does.
Some do have pivot offsets.
But yeah.
Yeah, off the top of my head, control and sprite 2D.
Yeah, so it depends, but in general, you can very easily create a higher level node, which then you can make it a child of and then edit the position like that. Thank you. Never. Probably, I don't know, probably in like 10 years.